At the same time that China's collecting the DNA of Americans and other foreigners, it is doing its best to prohibit the transfer of the DNA of Chinese to foreign researchers. And that means we've got to be extremely concerned, because that is not consistent with a country that wants to cooperate with the rest of the world. That is consistent with a country developing biological weapons that targets certain ethnic or racial groups. Well, China's efforts to collect DNA of the world's population have been determined. I mean, they're not only collecting Chinese people's DNA, but they're collecting DNA of everybody else. So, for instance, they've been buying up American companies that have DNA profiles. Also, they subsidize the DNA analysis. So if you go to an ancestry company, chances are that it is actually a Chinese business that is looking at your DNA. And that, of course, can be shoveled on to the Chinese central government or Communist Party. Also, there's been hacking. We know that China hacked Anthem, which is America's second largest insurance company. That was discovered in January 2015. So there's so many different ways that China is collecting the DNA to make probably the world's biggest database of DNA of people on the planet. China has what's called vaccine diplomacy. And what they've been doing is going to developing countries, for instance, Morocco, Nigeria, many other countries in Africa, and saying, look, we'll get this vaccine to you, but first of all, we need to complete our trials. And so we're going to use your population as the test. And when they do that, when China does this, they get DNA data of the test participants. So that's another way that they're collecting DNA. But really what they're doing is they're saying to these countries, look, if you don't participate in these trials, you're not getting the Chinese vaccines. And so it's coercive. I think that China has at least two motivations. Well, first of all, we know that bio business is very important to them. They included it in their Made in China 2025 initiative, which is a decade-long program to dominate certain industries, including biotechnology. But also, there's something sinister about this, and that is we have heard reporting from Bill Gertz, for instance, in the Washington Times, that China is probably trying to develop diseases that target not just everybody, but target only certain ethnic or racial groups. Now, China is a party to the Biological Weapons Convention, which outlaws the development of offensive weapons. But there's no inspections regime for the convention. And that means we don't know what's going on, for instance, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We do know, however, that at the end of January, China sent General Chen Wei to head that P4 unit. And she is often described as China's top bioweapons expert. So the question is, why are they sending a weapons expert into this lab? And my guess is that China was just trying to clean up the lab. We have to be doing so much more. We've just had a proof of concept. You know, a lot of people have said, oh, you know, biological weapons really don't work. Well, we do know they work because we had the coronavirus, which may or may not have been a biological weapon, but we do know that it crippled the United States. And that's what Beijing is really looking for. So there's been a proof of concept, which means whether or not the coronavirus was a weapon, China has seen that biological weapons can work. And therefore, we've got to be extremely concerned. And the United States, I think, has to take a number of steps. One of them is to prevent China from getting the DNA of Americans. We should be unwinding these acquisitions of American companies with DNA profiles that China has purchased. We should not allow any Chinese or Chinese affiliated organization to test DNA of Americans. And we got to say to China, either you agree to an inspections regime or we're pulling out of the Biological Weapons Convention, because this seems to be unenforceable.